And we are live. Okay, welcome back to Trust Issues. I'm Karen Thomson here with my incredible colleague, Mia Kotalik. And today we're taking a hard look at what happens when a billion-dollar industry collides with inconvenient science and what gets buried in the process. We're starting with a headline that exposes one of the biggest truth gaps in modern sport, the NFL's concussion cover-up. For years, league-funded research downplayed brain injuries, discredited whistleblowers, and pushed a narrative that protected the brand, not the players. Mia is breaking down how this happened, who benefited, and why it matters far beyond football. We're then going to be joined by someone who's been at the center of this fight for the truth. Chris Nowinski, neuroscientist, Harvard football player, former WWE wrestler, and co-founder of the Concussion Legacy Foundation and the Brain Bank. Few people have done more to expose the real risks of repetitive head trauma and CTE. His work forced a global reckoning, and he's here to tell us what's still being ignored. We were going to shift to Dr. Mary Dan Eades, walking us through how the brain relies on, especially an injured one, ketones and BHB, but unfortunately she can't join us live, so we will do that show at another time. And with that, Mia, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Okay, perfect. So the first thing that we're going to be talking about is a review study from 2015. This is just one example. There's a lot more, but I just picked one because we don't have a ton of time. It would take 100 hours to go through all the examples. So this is the study. It was published in PLOS One, February 11th, 2015, titled Chronic Traumatic Encephalopathy in Contact Sports, a Systematic Review of All Reported Pathological Cases. I might have said study. It's not a study. It's a review paper. But so this is from the abstract, quoting from the paper. So although initially believed to affect only boxers, the at-risk population has expanded to encompass a much wider demographic, including American football players, hockey players, wrestlers, military veterans. So basically, they're kind of saying this is in the media a lot, but from the results of this review, the problem might not be as big as we think, or, we don't really have enough data to say that CTE is from contact sports or is a big problem. So that's kind of what this review is saying. So here are some of the findings. Our review reveals significant limitations of the current CTE case reporting and questions the widespread existence of CTE in contact sports. Neuropathological and clinical findings related to CTE overlap with many common neurodegenerative diseases. No confirmed CTE cases to date with rugby or soccer players. So there was kind of talk like, we can't really say it's contact sports. If it was, we would see this in rugby and soccer because there's lots of, head contact in those sports. And then we conclude the incidence of CTE remains unknown. Our review reveals significant limitations of the current CTE case reporting and questions the widespread existence of CTE in contact sports. So that's another quote. It's from the same part in the abstract, but these were quoted in two different news articles after this came out. So this was kind of widespread as people saying, oh, you might have thought that football causes head injuries and CTE. That may not be the case. We actually don't have the evidence to support it. So when people looked at this paper, they saw the first author on there, Joseph C. Maroon, and people noticed that that name might sound a little bit familiar. So here he is, Dr. Maroon, at the Steelers game. And if you look in the paper, they did disclose that he's an unpaid consultant to the Pittsburgh Steelers, but that's it. Just unpaid consultant to the Pittsburgh Steelers, kind of maybe not that big of a deal. And then if you also look, you can see that the research team behind this review was a UPMC team. Why this is important is because the University of Pittsburgh University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, they have received numerous grants from the NFL and actually the Pittsburgh Steelers in particular. And Dr. Maroon was the team neurosurgeon for the Pittsburgh Steelers. He was the medical director for the WWE. So that's kind of brings in, there's wrestling is also mentioned in that paper as like CTE not associated with any of these contact sports. He was the NFL's head, neck, and spine committee consultant. And he is a founder and shareholder in this immediate post-concussion assessment and cognitive testing company. And an expert witness in medical and legal cases involving concussions oftentimes, saying that not contact sport related. So that's his whole history of conflicts of interest with this review paper that were not originally disclosed. So there was some backlash. They did end up posting a correction saying all of those list of things that he is involved with. And then they also had to correct several other issues with the paper. So one of them was the mention of soccer and rugby. In the correction, they stated actually in their data set that they had in the review, there were actually soccer and rugby players within that paper itself. So they had to correct that. They had also incorrectly stated that they had performed a meta-analysis of 40 studies. And a meta-analysis implies kind of a high level of statistical rigor, but it was actually not a meta-analysis. It was a quantitative analysis, which is far weaker. You can't really draw a lot of conclusions from that. So that was also published in the correction that came out on June 3rd of 2015. This is from the original papers that came out in February. So this is, a month after that. ABC saying, NFL doctors saying CTE is rare, football is safe. Again, we have the Washington Post, CTE is over-exaggerated. And this review article was cited 158 times. So after the corrections came out in June, there was some media correction. So we have this again from the Washington Post saying scientists said sports-related head injuries aren't a big deal. He forgot to say he works for the NFL. So there was a little bit of correction on this. Those original articles, though, there's not a correction on those, which is interesting. And we see that a lot when people cite a paper that is later retracted, is in their paper, they never mention that the study that they're citing was found to not be reliable. So people don't often go back and check older stuff they did. If news comes out, we just get a new article that will say something like this that's conflicting an older one. But there was some media correction in this, which is nice. We saw with the apple cider vinegar one that there was like very little media correction on that. But that was more recent. This is, I guess, over 10 years ago. So there's more time for corrections. But this is kind of the tip of the iceberg. This is one very small example of a flawed review when there's lots and lots of deep history of cover-up in CTE and contact sports. So this is just kind of a short overview of that. So in 2005, there was a doctor, Dr. Amalu, who linked CTE to football after studying the brain of Mike Webster. And the NFL did several things to discredit him. And they had this mild traumatic brain injury committee that they started to, I guess, PR reasons, make it seem like they were caring about brain injuries. But that committee ended up just publishing a bunch of flawed studies, minimizing the concussion risks and attacking anybody who was questioning them, including Dr. Amalu and Dr. Ann McKee, who we'll hear a little bit more about later. And eventually, the NFL restructured their committees a little bit, and they had paid out millions and millions and millions in lawsuits to players and their families. And in 2017, there was a study that found 110 out of 111 NFL players, they found CTE, basically highlighting that this years and years of cover-up had really been successful in kind of hiding that news. But this is a very broad and horrible issue. And then one of the individuals who's done a lot of great advocacy work and spreading this news and who has worked with Dr. Ann McKee is Chris Nowinski. And he'll be joining us later, but this is his foundation, concussionfoundation.org, if you want to go and learn more about the work he's doing. But we'll also hear from him in a few minutes as well. But I'm going to leave this up for anyone who is curious and wants to check this out. He co-founded this foundation.
Yeah. And also, I think he co-founded the Brain Bank with Dr. Ann McKee, where they ask for people to donate their brains when they die for research. And they are, I think, expanding into like Alzheimer's. It's not just specifically related to CTE or concussions anymore, but we can ask him when he hops on. I think for me, when I was researching this story, what really stood out was this 1952 study, or that was released, stating that if a football player, we're talking about football players, I know it's expanding into other sports now. If a football player had 3 concussions, that should end their career. That was 1952. It took 70 years of scientific misconduct, fraudulently making up studies, having a rheumatologist in charge of the NFL research for us to get to the point for this to be taken seriously. So do you have any more information about that 1952 study, Mia?
That was originally in this, but I didn't want to go over time because I knew Chris was joining us. But yeah, so that's the one that comes out of Harvard, right? From the chief of surgery there. Is that the one I'm thinking of?
I don't actually know exactly which one it was, but it was 1952. I don't know which one. I have way too many tabs open.
Me too.
I am looking. First warning, 1952. Let's see if we can find that. Your document is pretty intensive, Nia. I know there's a ton of the thing is that there's they published 13 papers in the Journal of Neurosurgery as well, stating that CTE was not as bad as they were making it out to be, right? And the editor of the Journal of Neurosurgery, he was being paid by the New York Giants, I'm not mistaken. And so he was the one that signed off on these papers being published. And these papers were written or submitted by this rheumatologist who, for a rheumatologist to look at the brain and neurons and the effect that trauma has on the brain is really, really kind of crazy.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many examples. I just chose this one for this presentation because it would take forever to go through all of them. And we had like the clear lack of funding. There was no, disclosure of the UMPC stuff, or that he was, basically working for the NFL for years and years and years. And they had to put it out in their correction. But there's so many papers where you can trace back kind of where the money is coming from and see how it's affecting the data.
I wonder where Dr. Omalu is now, the Nigerian guy. Bennett.
I don't know. Let's see.
And I mean, the NFL had to end up paying $1 billion when all of this came out.
Yeah, there's just such a history of cover up in every corner. You can find more and more. And this is interesting because you can trace exactly where, I mean, in some other cases, like there's been some other retractions that we've seen and it's not as clear where the funding is coming from. It's like a little bit covered up, but I feel like for some of these, it's so blatant that it's crazy that it didn't come out earlier. But I mean, I guess that's why. It's because the people covering up had so much money, but
yeah, for sure. I think some of the biggest comments that I got when I posted my reel to Instagram yesterday and also to YouTube and Facebook, anyway, social media in essence, was that one of the people who seemed the angriest about what I was saying tried to say that this was about steroid use, that these issues developed, I don't think purely because of steroid use, but the role that steroids play in having this manifest later in life. And then also, I think the biggest concern was from parents about the kids and that the kids, especially those who play football, are allowed to start tackling at a very young age. And I know that that is something that Chris seems to be working on still. Do you know what those guidelines currently state? I mean, I had a kid who played football. He just quit. Thank goodness, especially now with this story. I'm like, thank goodness he quit football.
I know that there's a lot of like push for doing flag or offering flag football at younger ages rather than tackle. But it's also interesting because it's, in communities with more resources, more money, that they have the option to do either tackle or flag. In communities that don't have as much money, it's often only tackle football that people have access to. So, the most vulnerable are, expected to do tackle football and be subject to more injury and risk. So they're trying to push for a flag in more places as an option, because a lot of people don't even have that. And you have like really young kids starting with tackle football. And Chris has entered the studio. So,
yay! Chris, hi. Hi, Chris. Can you hear me?
I think he's on mute.
Chris, can you hear us? The beauty of a live show. Mia, is there any way you can unmute him?
No, he has his on independent settings.
Oh, there we go. Can you hear us, Chris? Oh, you just muted yourself again.
Here.
There we go. Wait, I can't hear you. Can you click on the little microphone?
He's unmuted. His mic's just not connected.
Oh, the mic's not connected.
Oh, there he goes. I think he's got it now.
Yeah, switch mic.
Green. Yeah. Okay.
Hi! Welcome.
Thank you.
I don't know. Yeah, we went for dinner in Boston like 100 years ago, it feels like, when I organized a dinner for Greg Glassman, and you and Dr. McKee were there, and it was so special to have you guys.
It was our pleasure. I remember it very well.
Yeah, amazing. Oh my gosh, Chris, we are really beyond excited that you're joining us live. Since digging into the story and watching your interview with Dak Shepard, I am so glad my son recently quit football. But anyway, before we get into the everything else, when I was looking through the comments on Dax's show, there were so many people in there saying, I think I have CTE. My uncle died before we got answers. I lost someone to suicide. Thank goodness, I have more of an understanding of why this could have happened. What does it feel like for you to carry these stories?
Oh, yeah. We just had our gala last week where we shared a lot of the stories of our spouses who've lost their husbands to this, all in very tragic ways. And it is hard to believe that there's been so much death and destruction caused by CTE that people have not been connecting the dots with, and that we haven't been willing to talk about. But I'm glad we finally are. And I'm unfortunately a little surprised at how common it is.
Oh, for sure. I mean, your work has had such a big cultural impact in a sport. I mean, it's an entertainment industry, if we're honest, the NFL, right? It's not necessarily a sport. And I know that you face so much resistance, which must be incredibly hard. But before the NFL, before the committees, before the lawsuits, what was your moment of no return? The one case or the one autopsy or the one piece of information that you saw and you said, this is so much bigger than I realized, I need to fight this?
It was 2006. So I'd just written a book called Head Games Football's Concussion Crisis, but it was 90% concussions, one chapter on CTE, thinking, gosh, if football players are being diagnosed with this disease that boxers are getting, it makes a lot of sense to me, having hit my head a lot. But at that point, it was just Dr. Malu, who was in the concussion movie, looking at the two guys who died in Pittsburgh because he was working in the medical examiner's office. And I thought, well, if we're going to do this right, you actually got to go find the cases. And so a guy I grew up watching named Andre Waters took his life. And I sort of quickly learned how you get a brain studied by cold calling the medical examiner and then having to cold call Andre's mother. And sort of make this brain donation happen, but then also realizing that people don't read medical journals and making the deal that if it came back positive, we wouldn't wait a year for it to be published as a case report. We would go right to the mainstream press and say, look, people are killing themselves, not understanding what's going on in their brain, and we need to talk about it.
So what was the moment that you realized that this wasn't just ignorance, it was a massive cover-up?
Yeah, that was so. I wrote about the cover-up in the book because the cover-up was about concussions and any long-term effects at all. So, because I remember it was actually my high school athletic trainer when I was like first kicking around this idea of writing a book, she was like, oh, the NFL is doing a lot of really good research on concussions. You should go check that out. Because they had a reputation at that time for being cutting edge. Like we still trusted them on this issue. And then when I read the studies, what blew me away was I had learned how to read medical studies because of my brief period of time where I was in life sciences consulting. And I could see how the studies were structured in a way that they could not find long-term effects. So basically the only result could be everybody's fine. Like if you had retired from concussion, you drop out of the study, they wouldn't do follow-up and they'd claim, well, they're not an employee of a team anymore. We can't interview them, So so that was that moment where I realized, oh, this is strategic. Like this is a choice to say everything's fine. It's a choice to write articles saying we put half of people who are knocked unconscious back into the game and they survived. Therefore, it's a fine policy. And it's like, no, that's not how we should be looking at this.
Do you know what infuriated me is that 1952 study, and I don't know which one, but basically it said that a football player, if they're diagnosed with 3 concussions, they should retire from the game. Am I correct in this?
Yeah, that was the Harvard head of sports medicine's policy, that if you had 3 concussions in your life, he would retire you. And that became, and it's its own story of how that became, 3 concussions in a season, and you should stop playing that season. That's what it was in the 2000s and the 90s when I was playing. That's a guy named Paul McCrory who sort of took over the international CTE denier mantle and was exposed as a serial plagiarist, allegedly, and is no longer like seen in public anymore. But there were some squirrely things around that too.
And then the other thing that blew my mind was this rheumatologist that the NFL employed to do these 13 studies published in neurosurgery saying that CTE is safe. Like that scientific misconduct is so rife. Where else are you seeing this play out?
Well, I mean, I think this is a little bit, we're sort of replaying big tobacco, which we've sort of seen before. Like that this is the big tobacco playbook. We've seen it in other diseases where there's environmental exposures and it's easy to cast doubt. And you probably see it around, different ways that you study alcohol or carcinogens or all that stuff. Like there are ways to design studies and have them funded by industry so that the truth gets sort of obscured. And so you realize like there's a lot of money on the line in a lot of these things, and there's a lot of incentives to do things a certain way. I don't think it's not that the cover up is as obvious anymore. It's like now I see there's, the NFL is the only sports organization who recognizes that their game causes CTE. Everybody else is doing research, the NCAA, World Rugby. And of course, they're not asking the right questions. None of them have started, for example, a brain bank or supported that work because that shows things definitively. Instead, they're studying young people because that gives them 40 years to say, well, we won't know until they're dead in 40 years. And so they're literally trying to buy a generation to keep doing what they're doing because there's not definitive evidence because it wasn't longitudinal. And not everything needs to be longitudinal to draw policy conclusions or causation conclusions.
That petrifies me. Mia, go ahead.
I was just going to ask if you could talk a little bit more about the brain bank and how large it is now.
Sure. Yeah. So actually last night we had a meeting with our global brain bank. So we started, we partnered with Boston University to start seeking out like athlete brains, and now it's also veteran brains and domestic violence. That is now, at the time, there were 45 CT cases ever published in the world. We now have 1,700 brains donated and nearly 1,000 have had CTE. So it's been easy to find them when families suspect it or we suspect it. And then we started a brain bank in Australia with Michael Buckland. So that's now 150 brains donated. We just learned that our New Zealand colleagues have really gotten the brain bank going for a country of 4 million people. Their numbers are very impressive, but not for me to release. We just started a new partnership with Oxford, and they just got their first 5 brains in this year of professional soccer players. University of Toronto now has nearly 100 cases. And Sao Paulo, Brazil has actually, if you die in the morgue at the Sao Paulo hospital, one of the busiest in the world. I've been to that morgue. It's scary. It's like a horror film. 6 tables going at all times, but they have huge volume, and it's a huge city. And they ask everybody who comes in who dies age 50 or more, their family, if they'd like to donate their brain, because they're trying to actually do an aging study, just as what does random people look like. And so we've studied 2,500 consecutive brains there for CTE, and we'll publish that it is extremely rare in the population. And that's why when you find it, 90% of NFL players, it really means something.
Wow.
That's incredible. So you co-founded the Brain Bank with Dr. McKee, correct?
Yes.
I want to know about donating brains, right? While we're on this topic, how do I donate my brain to the Brain Bank? I mean, I don't want to die right now, but like when I do pass on, like that would be an amazing thing. And what are you currently researching?
Yeah. So to donate your brain right now in the U.S., the laws are actually different in every country. In the U.S., it's just a pledge, and your body becomes the property of your family when you die. So our job when people pledge is to actually convince them to tell their family about it, but their parents, their kids, whoever their next of kin is, and might be the next of kin, so they know this is part of their wishes. And then when 2/3 of the time, we usually know the person's going to pass soon. And so that they often call ahead, and it's coordinated. Still about a third are like sudden death, very sad situations in which we have basically 72 hours to get the brain recovered. And that can often be, we have a really great team of research assistants and coordinators that make that happen all over the country. And then what are we studying right now is, gosh, it was amazing to hear what everyone's studying in this global group. The biggest issue is we can't diagnose it in living people. And without having what's called a biomarker for it, it's very hard to then test how interventions are actually doing with the disease and with symptoms. Because if you took a bunch of football players and tried to put them into a study, some percentage of them wouldn't have CT, and therefore you wouldn't know. It would skew the study, and you wouldn't know if the drug actually worked. So we need to develop diagnostics, and that comes from also understanding the mechanism of the disease. Why is it happening? What are the first steps towards it happening? Well, what's the cascade of events, and where could we actually, plug a hole and stop that cascade, so that people who develop this disease in their teens most often could stop it 10, 20 years later and not have lost many neurons and therefore not have many symptoms.
Where are you along that process? Because that's fascinating.
We are taking shots on goal every day. So the biomarker question is hard. We've tried 4 different types of PET scanned ligands to figure out if we can put a radioactive compound in your body that attaches to the tau protein that you can image for an hour. They work for Alzheimer's, but they aren't working for CT, because Alzheimer's and CT share a lot, but they're misfolded tau proteins in slightly different ways, and so nothing is binding. So that's been disappointing. We've started a new strategy of blood markers. So basically, when your brain's rotting, it's getting. Everyone all right?
Yeah.
When your brain's rotting, your neurons and your brain tissue is getting into your bloodstream, because we also have breakdown of the blood-brain barrier. So you can pick up Alzheimer's from the blood now. You can pick up tau, p-tau 217. We need to figure out what that is for CT. We know it's there. We know it's unique. We just haven't done the test. So we got Michael Osko and Torstein got a grant to get 1,000 people to donate blood and their brain when they die, and take cognitive tests along the way. And we had 5 years to recruit for it. We got all 1,000 in the first 15 months. And the first 2 just passed away. One of them we're actually honoring this weekend. The first one who passed away, his name was Chip Collins. He was the captain of his high school football team in Western Mass, and developed dementia symptoms in his late 50s, died at 70. So just another high school player, not unlike the person, Shane Tamura, who went to NFL headquarters and killed 4 people, who also just was a high school player and had CT. I think it's very much more frequent than we realize in high school players. So Chip, we're honoring Chip Collins this weekend. We're also honoring, I lost my second teammate to CT for my starting Harvard team my senior year. I got his picture right here. Mike Brooks. He was our strong safety, big hard hitter, tough kid, sweet kid, struggled and died in his 40s. And he had stage 2 CT, just like my other teammate, Chris Eitzman, who was our tight end and our captain, and he died. So it's like, almost 10% of the guys off of my starting team already have died with CTE. which is something. So anyway, so there's a guy named Ross Tucker, who you don't know, is a former NFL player and broadcaster, and he is part of the NFL's My Cause, My Cleats campaign. So he's honoring. Actually, I have one of those shoes out. We once honored Junior Seau with it. So every year he gets these shoes. He wears them one day, and they get raffled off, and it's funny. So it'll be Chip and Mike this year.
Wow. I mean, like, we didn't actually go into your personal history of like why you became interested in this as a WWE wrestler, as a Harvard football player, and suffering concussion yourself. When speaking, because I don't remember the player's name, excuse my ignorance, but you got into contact with the player, and he then, a couple of months later, he was angry when you called him, and he said he'd call you back, and he never did. And then a couple of months later, he ended up killing his entire family. I want to talk a little bit about your experience and like how that impacted it, and then speaking to these players who are having these symptoms and this change of personality and what that feels like.
Yeah. So I got into this because I hit Ned too much. So beyond football, I wrestled for the WWE and had a great time doing it until the concussions added up, and one just I didn't get better from. So that was what led me to sort of researching the issue of how do I get rid of these headaches that eventually lasted 15 years but are finally gone. And along that journey, when I was writing the book, Chris Benoit, who was a WWE champion, very well-respected guy that I had known for 5 years and was very kind to me, he had confided in me that he was very interested in my book, and then let me know he had concerns. We set up a call. He told me to call me back, and he never did. And I didn't call him again. And then, so then he didn't show up to a show, and they went to his house and found he'd killed his wife and 7-year-old son and himself over 48 hours, and had left very strange messages on their bodies. And it didn't make sense. And then the more you talk to the other guys who knew him, they said he was really unraveling in that last year. So that has always motivated me because, he's now one of, we have a lot of murder suicides in the brain bank now. I was actually just pursuing a case this morning. There was a murder suicide of a football player, high school sweethearts, cheerleader and football player. At 30, he killed her and himself. And we see that a lot. And had I got that brain, I think we would have found CTE. Not that I'm saying it's going to happen to everybody, but it's just like, I don't think we've missed one when we've gotten these sorts of really sad tragedies. So that's part of what motivates me, is that these guys are out there suffering. Their families are really the bigger victims, their kids and their wives. Like, we think we're all tough, like sacrificing ourselves out there in the field. And then we realize, like, when you get home when you're 40, like, no one cares what you did in the field. You got to be, a husband or a father, whatever you choose to be. And it's a lot harder to do that with brain damage and a progressing brain disease. And so we need to help these people. Actually, another call this morning was with one of my colleagues who sees these NFL patients, and he showed up to a meeting. He's like, I'm like, you all right? He goes, I just got out of the hardest patient meeting I've ever had, of a young football and a former NFL player younger than me who could not put a sentence together and it was not making sense. And he was just like, he was truly rattled, and I've never seen him rattled. But these are hard people to put back together. It can be done, and we encourage everyone who's worried and struggling. Like, I could tell 10 success stories for every sad story of people who get treatment and go on and have a good life. But not everybody can be fixed once you've started this severe brain damage.
It's interesting. I'm seeing it more and more in the news, like when there's reports of shootings, or like even just in September of this year, there was that New York City shooting, and they found that the shooter had symptoms of CTE and evidence of CTE. And then I think there was another one from this year that they had also linked to CTE. So, yeah,
I mean, there was also an article in The Nation 2 days ago it's been harder to release those stories. Like, there's actually there's not only media fatigue, like, of what's new about this. Like, we get it now. Basically, you play a lot of football, you're going to have CTE. So no one's surprised anymore when you see it. But there's also the issue of, the NFL has, when we started this, football was on like ABC and NBC, and that was it. And now they've given a game to Netflix and Yahoo and Apple and I don't know, everybody gets a game. Prime has their Thursday night games. Like, everyone has a game. So you'll never see a CT documentary on those stations. You'll never see it. It's like a known thing that everyone's like, oh, this is a really good idea. But then when I actually look at the numbers, like, I mean, there's HBO Real Sports is gone. ESPN, NFL now owns 10% of ESPN. So Outside the Lines is not about investigating this issue anymore. I don't know if the show even exists anymore. There is no investigative anymore in television on this issue. And so it has really quieted the conversation because it's only print now or streaming on YouTube because we develop the stories and, it's hard.
Oh my God, this is devastating. I mean, this is definitely the entertainment empire, not, the
Right.
NFL is an entertainment empire, doesn't protect the players, protects the profits.
Well, yeah, and to be fair, like it's also the complicated thing is that I am fine with adults doing dangerous jobs, to make money if they have informed consent and reasonable measures are taken. And there's a union now through which they can have these conversations about how dangerous they want the game to be. But the problem is everyone who's playing in the NFL is recruited as a child, and the NFL is actively recruiting 5-year-olds to play tackle football, and that's where this whole thing falls apart. It is an entertainment sport. But the NFL is trying to create fans by having kids put helmets on at 5 and pretend to be the stars they see on TV because they know that if you play Pop Warner football, you also watch NFL that weekend with your family. That's like sort of your life, your football family. And so we don't have enough conversations around the fact that the NFL, did a lot of damage to awareness of CT with their fight of it for a decade. And those ideas that CT is not proven still exist on my social media feeds when I'm saying you should wait to play tackle football till high school. Parents say, no, there's not enough proof yet that CT football is causing CT. So we're exposing children to a preventable pediatric brain disease that is underwritten and marketed by the NFL. But there's no one to call them on that, and so it still happens.
This infuriates me so much. I will say I'm from South Africa. I only moved here about 8 years ago. And obviously my kids grew up playing tackle rugby from the age of 6, barefoot tackle rugby, no helmets, no protective gear. The South African thought pattern is that if you don't have this protective gear, your body naturally will try and protect itself a little bit more than when you have this full sense of security with these big helmets and pads and everything. Is there any truth to this? Because this is literally just me as a mom on the sidelines.
Yeah, well, so it's a fair argument. It's the wrong argument for CTE.
Okay.
Because it is true that you will not, like when I played football, I was trying to hit people with the front of my head because that was the best way to knock them down and push them backwards. And so we do that, and you don't do that in rugby because you will hurt, or you are more likely to have a concussion or a skull fracture or whatever. But then when you look at the actual game, because you still have to tackle, the number of hits to your head are actually the same.
Yeah.
And so
and probably more.
Well, yeah, I mean, definitely can be more because you have way more tackles per game. And
Way
so
more.
the issue then becomes CT is a math problem. If
Okay.
you take, like basically we've proven with American football style hits, your odds of getting CT go up about 20% per 1,000 hits. And the number of people who have more than 20,000 hits who don't have CT is very small. So it's basically like zero. It's you go from zero, and a very small percent with a few hundred hits to nearly, possibly 100% at 20 or 30,000 hits, and it's just a straight line in between. And no one is acknowledging that's our understanding today. That's the evidence we have today, and so therefore we're not even taking strict measures to reduce the number of hits. Like it's not part of the conversation.
You have a really powerful way of putting it into perspective with like child abuse and just kind of the history of, I think what you're saying is we've never been hitting kids in the head more until like this period of time. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So it's sort of interesting too, because we're studying this through the brain bank in abuse. We get a lot of abuse cases. And we don't see as high of a percentage in abuse cases as we do in football cases. A high percentage CT. And that is sort of logically because it's really hard to hit a kid in the head 1,000 times a year if they have the ability to run away or avoid you, right? Or you would feel really guilty. So it's really rare in abuse cases to get to that exposure. But we have 2 million young boys in this country playing tackle football before the age of 18 who are taking somewhere between 200 and 2,000 hits to the head per year. And we sort of make the case that, as neuroscientists, I can tell you, your brain can't tell you if it's your parent's fist that's striking your head or another kid's helmet. And so if you actually step away from the why the hit's happening and just focus on the hit, we are, you could frame this as a way of abuse. I mean, certainly the result is abuse when you get brain injuries and CTE. And so that's a way to try to get people out of the idea of like, this is normal. Society tells me this is fair and okay, to no, you would never do this to your own child. And so organized sports is not that old. Pop Warner as an organization was not national until the 1960s. And so we are definitely, I mean, I think it's absolutely true. We're hitting kids in the head more now than we ever have in human history, because there just was not a way to hit a kid in the head 1,000 times a year, each year for 10 to 15 years, 100 years ago.
Yeah.
Soccer balls, it's also like rubber soccer balls. Like before rubber soccer balls, you couldn't head a ball that much, right? Leather was not that fun to head, and kids didn't do it. You couldn't get it in the air as much. And so it's interesting from my sociology undergrad to look at this is a new problem. And that's partially why we've missed it.
Have there been advancements and I guess awareness at local levels for children who do want to play soccer, do want to play football at younger ages, and ways to make that safer?
On the concussion front, so everything's still framed through concussions, but we did advocate. We worked with Brandy Chastain and a bunch of superstars from the women's national team from that era, and got heading banned. Created enough pressure to get heading banned in soccer before age 11. And in England, just this year, they banned it before age 12. And so I think that's a movement that hopefully will continue to get in English-speaking countries at least. But American football, tackle football participation is down 30%, and they've moved to flag, and that's good. Depending on your league, there might be some restrictions on how many days a week you can hit, but the days a week is not the right way to limit it, because when the NCAA said you could no longer have 2-a-day practices, which I did in the 90s, and then only go to 1-a-day, they found out they got hit more because the coaches crammed more hitting in. So it's there's not like people are not educated on why we've changed some of these things. They just think as long as the people aren't getting diagnosed concussions, everything's fine. But solving the concussion issue is not the same as solving the CT issue.
Is there any sort of like mandatory reporting of numbers and stats for that? Like I know in baseball, they count like the amount of times you pitch to protect, children's, I guess, shoulders. Is that what you
elbow? Their ulnar collateral ligament. We were very concerned about their adult development if they hurt their ulnar collateral ligament.
Okay,
yeah, so I was making this argument yesterday to a head of a conference on, we have hit counts. Like, do you have any idea how often your athletes are getting hit in the head? He goes, no. The tools are there. So you can now put a mouth guard in or something in your helmet to count the number of hits and reasonably approximate how strong they are. Nobody wants to do this. The coaches want to be accountable. The schools and the organizations don't want to create a record of what they've done to these athletes that will then be used against them when those people eventually develop mental health disorders and dementia and come back and sue. So they're only used in a handful of research studies for people to sign their lives away. We were very bullish on the idea that these sensors would be the way we get everybody to minimize exposure, but no one will buy them. So now we're trying another way, which is to potentially use video to actually approximate the hits. The AI is getting better so that we can give people feedback. Because once we can count them, I think people will be very uncomfortable with what's happening.
Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Oh my God, how scary. Are there any other factors contributing to CTE? I know like Tim Noakes did a lot of work on concussions though, with a central governor theory model. Anything else that they should that our young players should be aware of?
No, I mean, yeah, there's lots to think about. Actually, I can tell you, my mind drifted while you started asking that question. So remind me of the first part of that question. I had an answer, and then you switched.
Oh, I was just asking about like Tim Noakes, Professor Tim Noakes from South Africa. He did a lot of research on concussion, right? And central governor theory.
I don't know that theory.
Okay, well then we don't have to. I'm not well versed enough in that, but maybe we can circle back on this. I just quickly want to check if you are good for time for us to continue, because I do want to be respectful of your schedule.
Yeah, I'm okay for a few more minutes for sure.
Okay, perfect. Okay, I want to know, what's the one thing about concussions, CTE, or the NFL that you wish you could say on every platform, but usually can't?
That one concussion can change, who you are for the rest of your life. Most don't, but way too many people have never been the same. And we've tried to sanitize it and make everything seem fine. And they go into the protocol and this is medical. But the reality is, once that hit is done, you may not be the same person anymore. I was just reading another article about Antonio Brown today. I think that's a great example that the world is sort of connected. The great wide receiver in the NFL who everything seemed fine in his first half of his career, and then he took one really bad hit. And he's sort of never quite been the same. And now he's facing prison for attempted murder.
That's beyond devastating. How do you, with the brain bank and the research that you guys are doing, how do you protect scientific integrity in your work?
Part of it is just working with the right people. Like, the great thing about scientists is that, almost everyone is in there for the right reasons. They certainly have exposed a lot of bad actors in the space, but generally, scientists are there because they care. It's very hard work. It's very hard to get funded. And so I've been lucky to have a good feeling about, like, my mentors, like Dr. Robert Cantor, Dr. Anne McKee, or Dr. Bob Stern. They were all in it for the right reasons and did their work very ethically. And we have these conversations all the time about this, because there is a right way to do this, because people need to be able to trust science if we want to have the best outcomes. And it's always at risk of bad actors who are focused on their own benefits or the benefits of corporation that can change that for us.
One thing I really like about the way you do your advocacy work is you're always very clear about what data we have and what it shows, and not like over exaggerating it, like I see happen a lot in headlines. Like, one of the things I remember you talking about was when people are considering the increased suicide risk with each concussion that you have, I guess, going back to consider the relative risk versus absolute risk. So if you're thinking back, like, I did get a concussion when I was a kid, and looking at those statistics that are saying, like, you're 5 times more likely, 2 times more likely, it's, the baseline risk is low. Right. Can you talk a little bit more about that and just kind of the fear that comes up around it?
Yeah, and it's a really important issue because, again, I got into this world. You think about my first few cases: Andre Waters takes his life, Justin Strelzik loses his mind as hearing voices and dies in the police chase, and then Chris Benoit kills his family, and you sort of feel like, oh God, everything ends like this. And then but once you start getting more understanding experience, you realize these are the outliers. Most people with CTE actually live into their 70s and 80s, and they might have certain stories that the families tell, but they're still highly functional people. And so that's an important message to tell the at-risk population, is that the stories that get the headlines of Junior Seau driving off a cliff and shooting himself in the chest they are rare. They're not as rare as you'd like them to be, but they are rare. And then the suicide discussion is a constant one, because when we first started seeing this, it's easy to draw that line from, okay, well, Andre Waters had CTE and he killed himself and he was getting lost, and it's CTE sort of cost him to kill himself. And then you realize, though, big picture, like, it certainly may have played a role, and it probably plays a role in almost everyone's deaths. But we also have to accept the fact that there's very few ways that people die young, and suicide is the number 1 or number 2 cause of death in the decade bands from 15 to 45. And so any brain bank is going to have a ton of suicides if they have young people. And so when we talk about suicide, we try to be very careful in what we can say and what we can't say with the state, and also, always remind people of hope in the treatment works and all those things, because, it is, there have been a spate of suicides with former NFL players even this year. And it's just, you want to do everything you can to avoid that.
Yeah, it's interesting how the different variables can shape, the data set in ways that people might not be thinking about. Like, when people talk about the position that you're playing in football, and it's, if there's certain positions that are more likely to give you CTE, but then you look at the data and you see, like, people play different positions all the time, or like they started at different ages and all of that. So it's hard to make these, like, definitive conclusions when it's, more correlation. And
everybody forgets that we rotated on special teams every week, and no one remembers what they were playing and when. And so that is probably what skews the data the most. You could, 2 linemen, but one of them's on every kickoff. That person's going to have a way worse experience.
Yeah. And then you don't have that data. It's all lost because people can't recall it, or they're reporting it in ways that is not.
Yeah. And so the best advice is don't be on the kickoff and kickoff return teams. And my conversation yesterday with a former team captain at a prominent school was, don't forget I was the wedge buster and wedge for 3 years. And it's like, and we're helping him because he's struggling. And there's those two things are probably correlated.
I want to end on like a little bit more of a positive note, because you did try and bring it more around that, you know what I mean? Even though we are seeing and discussing all these horrific cases, there is still hope. You mentioned CTE starting to develop in the teenage years, right? So we don't necessarily know or can diagnose it, but what is the treatment and what are the outcomes?
Yeah, everything right now is symptomatic treatment. So, if your problems become mental health related while you're young, we can treat those things and you can go on to live a fine life. When you're older, it gets harder. And so what I tell people is, we have options now, and definitely reach out to the Concussion Legacy Foundation. I will connect you with the best doctor you can drive to who understands this stuff, because I know who that is. But we also need better answers. And so my other message is I keep trying to tell the sports world, like, part of the reason I care about this is because the bonds I built with the people I played with, right? You actually respect these people, and they're your tribe. And when this work initially happened, the NFL and others sort of made it as a threat against the sport, like you're bad mouthing football, and football is not a person, right? We're doing this for the people who played. And if we can actually take that energy of the positives of sports and being a teammate and work together and sort of that loyalty you have to the guys you played with and try to cure CTE, we could actually get it done maybe in 15, 20 years. So we need more people to look at it like that. I'm going to take all the benefits I got from sports, put together a team, and try to solve this problem for the people I care about. And we need a lot of help to do that, because there are a lot of people who stepped up, but this needs to be like a truly global effort.
Very practically, what does that support look like, and how can we get our community involved?
So practically, that means, I would say jump on the concussionfoundation.org. Sign up. You make donations. The finances run this. You can sign up for research. So we always need people to sign up for research. You can share our helpline with people. So anyone who's struggling, we can make sure that they get the care they need. I would say those are three very easy ways to do this. And if you're an athlete, check in on your teammates, see who needs help, start the conversation, make it okay to talk about long-term effects, mental health, CT stuff.
Okay. Schools hate to see me coming because I'm the lady who doesn't want sugar in the cafeteria or any like processed carbs or junk food. Like, they don't like me. The football team also strongly dislikes me as well. But how do we as parents with kids who are playing football protect them? Because this is, the consequences are horrific.
No, it's hard. I mean, we started a Flag Under 14 campaign because it was easy. Like you get most of the benefits without the risks of those head hits. And so towns need to be a little more aggressive about it. It's not appropriate to hit a 10-year-old in the head that much, and those hits actually do matter. The misinformation about they're not running that fast is not true. They have tiny heads, big bodies. Those hits are just as bad as college players, the data says. I think what we tell the high school programs is we got to start talking about CT. We're not. The players aren't educated. The coaches aren't educated. And so no one's trying to prevent it. And so until you start a conversation around it, you're not going to prevent it. And if you're not willing to start that conversation, maybe you should be playing the game. The other weird thing about this whole thing that no one wants to sort of have that conversation is our educational system is the number one brain damage provider for young men in this country through football. Right? I mean, you don't get hit that much otherwise. It's the number one reason you show up to the emergency room with concussions is football when you're young. And, not that it shouldn't exist, but, if we're not even going to acknowledge it, the number of people who played high school who have CT I think we're going to show is dramatically higher than anyone realizes. And so I don't know. High school football has to acknowledge this, or else it's going to, be in a very tough place in a couple of years when we know how big this is.
Well, Mia, unless you have anything else, or Chris, unless you have anything else, I think this is a good place to end. We're just so grateful to have had you on the show.
Thank you so much.
No, it's my pleasure. I appreciate you sharing this information with your audience.
Thank you so much for all you do, Chris. Like, you are incredible, and very grateful to you and Dr. McKee for the work that you're doing.
All right, thank you, Karen. Thanks, Mia. Take care.
Bye.
Do you want to talk about next week briefly?
I'm so disturbed after that conversation. Like, this has made me feel so sad and despondent, and just like, how do we move forward with this? I really did want to get into the role of ketones on the brain and potentially like supplementation of BHB, but we can look at, having Mary Dan talk about that. Sorry about that. I'm having an emotional moment. But moving right on, next week we have Gary Taubes. We are going to talk about the bodybuilder bias, which is very interesting. Gary has a Substack, and he wrote about how there's this thing called the bodybuilder bias, and we will get into it. It's not aimed at bodybuilders. It is just aimed at this thought that if you can eat, if a person, a bodybuilder, for instance, can eat 400 grams of carbs and stand there and say, look, carbs don't affect me badly, that should apply to the rest of the population. So we'd love to have you guys on. Dr. Mary Dan Eades will be joining us. Mia, what are you going to be debunking next week?
I haven't gone through it yet. There's 3 options, so I have to pick one that goes with Mary Dan's stuff.
Ooh, okay.
But I'll
can you share the 3 options so that we can have a vote?
Okay. Let's see if I can bring them up fast enough.
Sorry to put you on the spot. I do it a lot. And thank you to all the audience who've joined, and you guys for watching and supporting and being here. It means so much. Lori, Jess, Avery, Ace of Losers. I don't know your name. I don't know who it is. Melissa, Paulina. I hope Leaf is watching and will give some feedback later.
So what I think I'm going to do next week, because it goes well with Gary Taubes' stuff, is going through some of those headlines and studies about like myths on how to reduce glycemic spike. Okay. I guess they're not all myths. Some of them work, but some people are reading something that says if you put this in the fridge for 30 minutes and then thaw it and you eat it, you can have 100 grams of carbs and it's not going to do anything to your glucose, which isn't exactly true. But there are things that do reduce the spikes, which is really interesting. But I feel like sometimes people use those a little bit too much of a crutch and try and get past eating a bunch of carbs and thinking that they're not going to have a glucose spike.
It's me. That's me. It's me who puts the rice in the fridge for the night and thinks that it's going to be good. It's me who will freeze the sourdough and then toast it, and I feel like it has no effect.
I mean,
I need to show. Huh?
There is some validity to that, but it's not going to, cancel out a massive amount of carbs. But I mean, there is some validity to that. It's not a total hack, though. But yeah, so there's lots of different headlines like that we're going to go through.
Amazing. All right. Well, thank you so much for today. And thanks to everyone who watched. We will see you guys next week. Send your questions.
Thank you.
Bye.
Oh my gosh, she left me and this won't end. Okay, there we go.